So maybe can we just start by, you mentioned you were in cadets. Just tell me about the start of your involvement with the military. How did that begin?
Well, I was living in a place called Cooksville, Ontario, which is about 40 miles outside of Toronto. Well, maybe 20 miles. And a buddy of mine in high school joined the Sea Cadets, which is pretty much right downtown. Anyway, I got the bug, and there was 2 or 3 of us from the same high school went and joined this cadet corps. And we were there for years, and went to summer camp and all that sort of stuff. And when I got out of cadets, because there's an age limit, I joined the Naval Reserve and was just a seaman in the Naval Reserve. And then I applied for a commission, but I'm partially colorblind. And I basically failed the colorblind test. So, but this time I was in university, and I was reading a book on Canadian history and came across the Queen's Own Rifles, which was the Northwest Rebellion. And so I said, I think they're in Toronto. So I, on my summer vacation or whatever, went down and visited them, joined up, went for, I think, 1 year summer camp as a rifleman, and then was commissioned thereafter and stayed there until my employer, which was Xerox Canada, transferred me to Calgary. And that's how I wound up in the Calgary Highlanders.
You told me how you came out to Calgary.
Right.
Tell me about your first impressions of the Calgary Highlanders.
Well, what happened was, unbeknownst to me at the time, is that Sam Blakely had a buddy in Toronto who was in the Queen's Own, and the two of them put their heads together, and Sam asked this guy whether this guy Hughes was worth having or not, and eventually he got in touch with me. He was not the district commander. He was the 2IC. I think Ovis Wag was the commander. Anyway, we got together, had a chat and whatnot, and he asked me whether I was interested in joining the Highlanders. And I went home and talked to my wife, and basically was of two minds, because I was building a house out in Cochrane, which ate up most of my spare time, full-time job plus construction manager. Didn't leave much spare time. Anyway, she prevailed upon me to take Sam up on his offer and join the Highlanders, and I think I went in as the 2IC. Lynn Moffat was the CO, and then when he retired, I took over. I think that's how it went. And I spent 3 years in the Highlanders, and then I was out for, I can't remember how long, but a period of time. And then Sam retired. By this time, he was the district commander, and he put my name forward to be his replacement, and that's how I became the district commander. So I did 3 more years as the district commander.
So you really had done most of that, up to that point, most of your military experience was with the Queen's Own.
I was a major when I left, and 2IC when I left Toronto.
So what was it like, just in practical terms, transitioning from rifle regiment to Highlander?
It was incredible, I'll tell you. The first parade I was on, which I think was a change of command parade, when they said by the left, quick march, I was halfway through the band before I realized that they marched kind of slow pace and measured sort of pace. And I had to re-gear my whole thinking because it wasn't normal.
Was the unit pretty welcoming towards you as an outsider coming in?
Yes and no. There was a sort of a mini revolt, which didn't amount to much, because I think they had candidates who they felt were more appropriate than this guy from out of town that nobody knew. But that's quickly died down, and we established a good relationship. Yeah, so it was pleasant. It worked out well.
In terms of, we were talking earlier off camera about recruiting. In terms of just numbers, training, how healthy were the Highlanders when you joined?
Not good. I think it was. I was thinking about that this morning. I think it was an outpouring of the Vietnam era, and we had trouble recruiting, and we had trouble retention, and it was just a never-ending cycle of recruiting people and doing recruit training, and then having them. I mean, our attrition rate was terrible, having them leave, and it was never-ending. And at the same time, I forget what study it was, but they must have had some sort of a study, and they cut the band back from decent numbers, whatever they were, to, I think we wound up with 2 pipers, period. So it was trying times, to say the least.
So even here in Calgary, which is these days is a pretty pro-military city.
And it was then too.
It was still then, eh?
Yeah.
But you just couldn't get people to stick around.
Well, the economy was good, and I guess you couldn't make, in those days, couldn't make much money in the militia, and people went to work in the oil patch. I'm generalizing, but that's kind of the scenario.
So what was it like for you? You mentioned you're building a house in Cochrane.
Yep.
You're trying to juggle the house, your civilian job, the militia. What was that like?
Looking back on it, I don't know how I did it, quite frankly. It was, it was unbelievable. It was a 24-hour job a day, and I wouldn't recommend it. My wife was the big advocate. She came from a military family. As a matter of fact, her grandfather was in the Battle of Jutland. He was in the Royal Navy and was in the Battle of Jutland. And she was the one who really advocated that I take the offer of the command of the Highlanders.
What do you, are there any particular memories you have, either as the deputy commanding officer or as a commanding officer of an event, a character, something like that?
Yeah, 2 things stand out in my mind. Number one was when I got to Calgary and when I joined the Highlanders, I was surprised that they didn't have a colonel-in-chief. I was dumbfounded. I just thought every unit in the world had a colonel-in-chief, and they didn't, and they never have had at that time. So I screwed up my courage and sent a letter up the chain, I guess, to ask for a colonel-in-chief. And in those days, I asked for Diana, because she was top of everybody's mind in those days. And the answer came back from Buckingham Palace saying, no, thank you very much, but it'll be the Queen. So we got the Queen as the Colonel-in-Chief of the Highlanders. And that was the first. They'd never had a Colonel-in-Chief up until that time. The second thing that sticks in my mind was we had 2 honorees, Sam Nickel and Mark Tennant at that time, World War II guys. And, excuse me, Mark was coming to the end of his time in the position. So I bumped into Fred Mannix in the Patricia's Mess on Fridays and got to know him a bit, and I quickly realized that he was very pro-military And so I asked him whether he'd be interested in being an honorary. And his chief of staff or whatever over at the Mannix Corporation was Stan Waters. So I guess he conversed with Stan, and Stan said, yeah, you should take it. So a couple of days later he phoned and said yes, he would allow his name to be put forward, which I did, and he was accepted as the Honorary Lieutenant Colonel in Mark's replacement.
So he was the Honorary Lieutenant Colonel while you were still commanding officer?
Yes.
So what kind of a working relationship did the two of you have?
A very interesting one. He's a very forceful personality, as I'm sure you know, and consequently, he was always coming up with 1,000 ideas that I couldn't implement because I just didn't have the time or the staff or the opportunity. But he overall was very, very supportive. And then when Sam Nichols' term was up, he was moved from the Honorary Lieutenant Colonel to the Honorary Colonel.
Yeah. So I never met Mark Tennant. I keep hearing the occasional story about him. Can you your impressions of him?
He was I think he was from Lethbridge or Medicine Hat, somewhere down southern Alberta. Country boy, basically. Very rough around the edges, but I guess made an excellent soldier. I mean, he was used to the rough and tumble of country life, and rain and mud and whatnot didn't deter him whatsoever. I think he was the anti-tank platoon commander of the Calgary Highlanders during the war. He joined the Calgary Highlanders. I think he was a member of one of the units in southern Alberta, but he transferred to Calgary and joined the Calgary Highlanders and went overseas with them and became or was the anti-tank platoon commander thereafter.
So when you're new to the Highlanders, how involved was he at that point in his life?
He would attend parades, excuse me, 2 or 3 times a year, came to all the mess dinners, which I think there were basically 2 big ones during the year, and donated money to the trust fund. Not much money, but every dollar counts.
And what about Sam Nichol? What can you tell me about Sam?
Same basic story. He didn't serve in the Calgary Highlanders during the war. He was in I think the Provo Corps. Now, I could be wrong there, but he was not a Highlander for some strange reason. But was wealthy in his own right and supported the unit strongly, and used to have functions. He had a huge house down in Bel Air. Hope I've got that right. And used to support functions down there with his wife and Rosemary. And he was a strong supporter. They were the World War II brigade that, like Toronto, they served many terms as honoraries. Nowadays, it seems like it's 3 years and you're out, right? Yeah. But in those days, you could get, I think, infinite. It seemed like you could get infinite extensions.
Didn't his wife? She used to have sherry parties.
Yes, supported the IODE very strongly, and got the women together and supported the soldiers, the serving soldiers. They were. It was as if they were part of the unit. In actual fact, they were very, very supportive.
Did maybe you could help me with this? It's my sense that some of the traditions that are in the regiment today are things that maybe came about during your term or due to Colonel Mannix? You know, things like the plague.
Yes.
You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. He was very big on that sort of thing. The plaid, yes, you know, it was one of his introductions,
Okay.
for sure. I
And-
can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but he was very supportive financially and otherwise. And of
And-
course, he could pick up the phone and phone the Minister of National Defense at the drop of a hat, and that didn't hurt either.
Didn't hurt. Did it ever hurt?
Not that I was aware of, no. But he was, and of course he had Stan Waters at his elbow, coaching him along, I suppose.
So there's another famous personality. I know his biography, but what were your impressions of him as a man, as a retired soldier?
He was a soldier. He and the stories I heard about him were just. He was in that brigade. What was it called? The
Devil's Brigade.
Devil's Brigade. Yeah, and he was a very outgoing member of that organization. I can remember somebody telling, and after, I think the Devil's Brigade was disbanded, weren't they, or
That's right.
redeployed somewhere along the line?
1944.
44?
Yeah.
And he joined some unit, a regular infantry unit, and he came in with a half a mess tin hooked into his web belt, and that was about it. I mean, he was fit and ready to go. Yeah.
I heard he could be quite a forceful.
Oh, very much so. Very articulate. Yeah, he was very bright. Very bright. Yeah, and I met RSS people when I was the CO of the Highlanders that couldn't stop talking about him, that had served with him. I mean, his little anecdotes along the line. Oh, and of course he was the brigade commander in Calgary at one point in time. And a friend of mine, whose name escapes me, but a Queen's Own guy, used to run the depot in Calgary, and was very, very hard on the recruits. Well, I shouldn't say hard, but had very high standards for the recruits, and he had a higher than average failure rate from the recruits that they brought in. And one day he had somebody came down from NDHQ to take him to task about this failure rate that he was having, and he was feeling a little despondent about the whole thing. And they went over to the mess to have lunch, and they happened to sit at the same table as Stan Waters. And Stan launched into a tirade about how well he was doing, keeping these substandard recruits out of the regular force battalions. And so this chap felt much improved. And the chap went back to Ottawa with his tail between his legs.
You've mentioned going to the Patricia mess here back when the
Yes.
first battalion was here. Tell me, just during your time, what were relations like between the reserve and the regular force?
By and large, I think they were good. Occasionally you had some, commanders that weren't that keen, but the ones that I came in contact with were very supportive, would do what they had to do or to help, because we didn't have much else. I think we had one RSS officer per unit in Calgary, and that was it. And you either got a good one or a bad one, and the good ones worked like hell to keep our head above water, but the bad ones did nothing, and things suffered accordingly.
But socially, you could show up at the Patricia Home Station mess or the Strathcona.
Absolutely, yeah. Luncheons, we're invited to all their functions, garden parties, you name it. Of course, a lot of the commanders, some of the commanders were ex-Queen's Own guys, and we already kind of knew one another on the social network, so it helped.
And they would come, I'm assuming you would invite them to Highlander events?
Yes.
Yeah. Would they come?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Parades, dinners, you name it. They showed up and were quite supportive.
Something else I understand you ramrodded was the regimental book.
Yes,
That's a huge project. Tell me.
it was.
Tell me how you did that.
Well, I can't remember the details and how it was initiated, but there were a lot of things that were undocumented, like dress and traditions and whatnot. And so somehow, somewhere along the line, we decided to commit this stuff to paper, and we did. We produced a draft copy of honors, awards, traditions, blah, 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 of the Calgary Highlanders. And my term expired as this was going forward. And I think, as I recollect, my successor, John Fletcher, actually put it to press and got the thing published.
Okay.
And it's been updated, I think, several times since then with more current data.
So I can just picture how chaotic that would have been in a Highland regiment with all kinds of, bells and whistles, and
Yep.
nothing's written down.
That's right. And everybody had a different opinion as to what was the right way of doing something, and how to wear your kit and whatnot. Oh, it was a mess. It really was.
Any other accomplishments during your time or challenges that you want to mention?
Nothing that springs to mind. Just keeping your head above water was the basic challenge. It was a tough job. Ate up a lot of time. And we didn't have, and the Senate wasn't particularly helpful. I mean, they came to the meetings and offered advice and offered all kinds of things that they thought you should be doing that you're not, which then they finished their beer and left. And they weren't particularly helpful. Although they thought they were being helpful, but they weren't, as far as time management was concerned.
So that raises an interesting question. So you talked about Mark Tennant as
Yes.
a World War II vet.
Yes.
You still would have had a large number that were alive and
Yeah.
well
Oh,
back
yeah,
then.
for sure.
So what was their involvement with the regiment during the course of a year?
Well, they came to the Senate meetings when they were, former COs came to the Senate meetings, which happened 2 or 3 times a year, I guess. Came to the parades that happened 2 or 3 times a year. And those that lived in Calgary came to the mess dinners. And I mean, you couldn't, the mess, the dining room. You couldn't get into the dining room at a mess dinner with serving officers and the former serving officers. They were well attended. Now, I haven't been to a dinner recently, but I guess all the World War II guys have long since gone, and so be it.
So they were still coming out in good numbers to support a couple of times a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Who were you? Do you remember who the district commander was when you were the CO? I'm just curious about.
I think it was Ovis Wag.
So.
What? No, when I was the CO?
You were the CO.
I think it was Sam Blakely.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I think.
So what kind of a boss was he?
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, he was demanding, but he was fair and had a great sense of humor. And he was active in the Infantry Association Yeah, he was all things to all people. He was a great guy. Yeah.
What was your own experience when you got into that chair and when you replaced him? Do you recall?
Nothing, nothing out of the ordinary that I can think of. You didn't have the direct contact with the soldiers that I was used to in the unit. I mean, you were basically dealing with commanding officers and whatnot of the units. So you were sort of one step removed, which I was not used to and didn't like that much, not having direct contact.
Where where were you? Where was your headquarters located when you were the district commander?
In the Armory.
In Mawada.
Yep. Up that stairway on the second floor.
Yeah. And what did you have for staff? How many people?
Actually, there was both civilian and military, and it was quite comprehensive in comparison to the unit where you had one person. Yeah. But yeah, it was a pleasure. And headquarters was at that time was in Winnipeg, so they didn't bother you much. Got the odd phone call, but they were quite well removed from the unit. Right. And the day-to-day activities.
Just so you know, like right now, the staff in the brigade headquarters is probably more than 80 people.
Really?
It's 4, 5, 6 times more than what you had.
Yeah, I would guess that we never exceeded 20 max, and that included civilian employees as well as military. And if it was 20, I would have eat my shirt. I think that was the high number.
When you were the CO or the district commander, is that when you had? I'd like to just talk a bit about training, but did you have the Grizzly?
They came in right at the end of my term as CO.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was a great clamor for people to get qualified as drivers and whatnot, but they came in, and they were the 6-wheel version, which didn't last long because when they took them on operations, I gather the front end sort of collapsed, and they were replaced by an 8-wheel version, which I never saw. We always had the 6-wheel version.
But was there a lot of excitement in the unit?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, up until that time, we had clapped out World War II Jeeps, which was the extent. And, well, I shouldn't say World War II. They're probably Korean War vintage vehicles, 3/4 tons, 2.5 tons. And they were pretty sad. I mean, and we had to, every year we had to take them to Camp Dundurn in Saskatchewan, and you could flip a coin as to whether they were going to get there or not. I mean, the breakdowns were incredible.
But I would assume you did most of your training at SAR-C.
Yes.
So what was that like, at having that training area right next to
it? Was very handy, and there were ranges there as well. So you really, up until the platoon level, you didn't really have to leave Calgary. I mean, the ranges were there, the training area was there. It was superb. When they gave that back to the band out there, then we had to go to Wainwright, which was a hell of a drive on a Friday night. I mean, it was hours, it seemed to me. And I mean, you were clapped out the next day because you didn't get any sleep.
You mentioned Dundurn. Is that where you went for your MilCon?
Yes.
So what sorts of things would you do in Dundurn?
Well, field exercises, basically. And that was dependent upon the current area commander, what he wanted to do. But it was essentially field exercises. We didn't do any ranges or let me think. Maybe I don't think there was any range work involved. It was dry training essentially.
And was it reservists only, or were you assisted
Yes.
by the regular force?
Good question. I don't think the regular force was involved. I may be wrong there, but other than I staff, the
Right.
people that were integral to the unit in any event. But I can't remember battalions being deployed to assist in training.
Have you got any stories or any sort of memories from that summer training when you're out there with the other units in Alberta across the West? Anything come to mind?
We had the Calgary Highlanders had a challenge every year with the unit whose name escapes me in Thunder Bay.
Oh, the Lake Superior Scottish.
Yes, as to who would bring the most soldiers to Milcon, and the loser CO had to present the winning CO a bottle of whiskey for losing the challenge trophy. And I think I lost 3 years in a row. It seems to me the people from Thunder Bay seemed to be able to turn out more people than we did.
That's a lot of whiskey.
That is 3 bottles in the course of 3 years.
Yeah, I'm just circling back to the Queen as a colonel in chief.
Yes.
I'm assuming you've met her probably more than once, but
No, I haven't actually. She came to a parade in Calgary, and I forget what year that was.
in 1990.
Was it?
Yeah, for the colors.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was held at Mwata Stadium, as I recollect. And
Actually, no, I think it was football stadium.
oh, McMahon.
McMahon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I didn't even meet her on that occasion because you had to you had to have a special pass to get on the field and join the old boys. And I didn't have a pass. They wouldn't let me on the field, so I had to sit in the stands. However, it was a grand occasion. And we wore, the unit in those days wore sort of a TW uniform.
Yeah, the tans.
Yeah, which didn't last long, but they looked quite smart.
I know that I've seen the photos of General de Chastelain, who had been a Highlander playing the pipes.
Correct.
Did you ever have anything to do with him?
No, not really. He visited the unit occasionally and used to grab a set of pipes and fit himself in the pipe band somewhere and carry on the parade with the pipe band. But I never really had any direct contact with him.
Oh, that's interesting. So that him playing for the Queen was not the first time he came back. And
I don't think he was on that parade, but I may be wrong. You may have to correct me there. I remember him doing that in the Army, but I don't remember it at the stadium.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to mention about your time with the Highlanders or with the district here in Alberta?
Nothing that I can really think of. It was enjoyable, it was hard work, and it was frustrating because we had that constant struggle of recruiting and recruit training, and you never seem to get beyond platoon level tactics. At summer camp, they may brigaded several platoons together to give you company level, but that was about the extent of it.
Who would be, in your memory there, who would be the biggest character in the unit around that time?
Well, the biggest character in the unit was Fred Mannix. I mean, he he overpowered everything else that was going on, and he had the money and the resources to make things happen, which was great. He was an excellent choice as an honorary, and not that we made use of it that often, but on occasion it came in very handy.
Is it fair to say that he was significantly more generous financially
Oh.
than his predecessors?
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt whatsoever.
So big shot in the arm.
Yeah, financially. Yeah. I mean, to him, small expenses like doing this or that were no barrier whatsoever. I mean, it just didn't ever cross his mind.
I don't know the answer to this. The Regimental Funds Foundation, did that exist when you were the CO as a charitable?
Yes.
It did, eh?
Yes.
Okay. And do you, the whole idea of having an honorary pay, like today still, an honorary colonel is expected to donate $25,000 a year.
Really?
Like, was that the case when you were the CO?
No.
Okay. So
I mean, we were lucky to get out of Fred's predecessors $500,000 per annum.
You know what I didn't ask you about was who was your regimental sergeant major?
Martin McCumber,
Okay.
who has since passed away. Very loyal, very. He was a Highlander through and through. Actually, I hired him at Xerox as well, and great fellow, great, but not in particularly good health. He had health issues, shall we say, and died shortly after I think I left.
What were at that time relationships like typically between a CO and an RSM in a unit like the Highlanders? Was it a close relationship, or was it his world, your world? How did you work together?
Well, it wasn't as close as what I witnessed today, which is the RSM is virtually in the back pocket of the CO, which is unique to me. I never witnessed that, and I think it's an American tradition as opposed to British Army. And of course, there were no NCOs. Let me get this straight. Beyond the district level. Whereas, you know, the now every senior commander in the Army seems to have an RSM tagging along, but that was unusual. Well, it was not known whatsoever in those days. I think there was a district RSM, but that was it. There was no area RSM per se that I can remember. So it was the unit, the district, and I think that was it.
And yeah, so you're right. It's an Americanism. The command team.
Yes.
That's the term we use now, is your command team relationship, right? So you, and just one more point of clarification, you went from being the South Alberta district commander, and then things changed, you became the Alberta district.
No, I never was Alberta.
Oh, okay, so you're South Alberta.
South Alberta, yep. That came in after I left.
We haven't talked about the other units in South Alberta. Any issues with them?
Well, the one thing that it still sticks in my craw was the South Alberta Light Horse in Medicine Hat, right?
Yes.
Have I got that right? For some reason or other, they transferred a squadron to Edmonton somewhere along the line. And before we knew, before we knew it, they were an Edmonton unit and not a Southern Alberta unit, which was the old thin edge of the wedge scenario. However, it happened, and I guess it's still in place and hopefully working.
What about, social training relationships between Highlanders and the King's Own, Highlanders and the South Albertas? Were they good? Were they adversarial? How were
No, they were non-existent, basically, as I remember. We all pretty much stuck to our own home turf, other than arguing over armory space, which was always an issue, with the cadet corps as well. There wasn't an awful lot of social contact between the two.
Really, eh? So when you Highlanders would have a mess dinner, would you be more inclined to invite the Patricias than the King's Own?
Well, we probably invite both.
Okay.
Whether they'd show up or not was another matter.
All right. Maybe just last question. Jumping from the Highlanders back to the Queen's Own, where you started, what was it like for you to go back to the Queen's Own as an honorary?
Seamless, basically. Other than having to reacquire my kit, which I had shipped back to Toronto, there wasn't much of a transition, quite frankly. And I still have more to do with the Queen's Own. They seem to be more active in their communications and fundraising and that sort of thing than the Highlanders, for whatever reason.
I'm assuming it must have felt good to get back in.
It was, yeah, I enjoyed it, and I always enjoyed the mess down. It was a separate mess. We had our own mess, whereas in Calgary, when I got to Calgary, it was this common thing that was shared by everybody, which was an anomaly to me. I had never seen this before, and so it was, it was good. It was like going home, I guess. It was very, very comfortable.
Because you did that with Dick Cowling at one point, right?
I was the Honorary Colonel. He was the Honorary Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay.
Yeah. Million stories to tell.
Well, I could think so. Well, unless do you have anything more that you want to talk about?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That was excellent.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.